So as people are entering the room, I'm going to give you just a little bit of orientation to LIHEAP 101, LIHEAP 102. How many people were actually able to come to the introduction to LIHEAP session and the pre-conference session yesterday? So that's great, because we've been doing this LIHEAP 101, 102 for the last 3 years. And one of the concerns people had is when we did LIHEAP 101, they said, well, there's so much more to know about LIHEAP, and you only covered a tiny bit of it. Well, that's right. In an hour, you can only cover a tiny bit of it. NEADA has a new directors session that lasts 6 hours this year. The session on Tuesday, that if you didn't get a chance to come, I would encourage next year to come to that pre-conference session, lasted for 3 hours. These sessions are LIHEAP 101 and 102. They are basics. We give you some basic information about one topic on LIHEAP. LIHEAP 101, we talked about the ways that states and tribes and territories are helping to make things easier for clients and more effective for staff. LIHEAP 102, we're going to be talking about delivering benefits that match client needs. These are two topics that NEUAC received requests explicitly for state grant recipients to address last year, and so we're going to do that. We did have a very important question during the LIHEAP 101 that we said, if you come to LIHEAP 102, you'll get the answer. The question was, why is the application process so complicated? Why can't we simply serve people with a flat rate versus all the calculations? What you're going to hear today is because the LIHEAP statute says you must do that. And as Melissa talked earlier today, there are assurances for the LIHEAP program, and within that you can do a lot of different things, but one of the assurances is that you need to target the highest benefits to the households with the greatest need. So during our session today, the speakers are going to talk about how to do that, how they do that, and then there'll be time for asking questions of why they do it in a particular way and whether or not they think that's effective. So we're going to start off with Dan, who's a senior project director at Apprise, to give you some background, and then we'll go into the session. The other thing I want to alert you to is, because we know these are important sessions, we're now recording them. And we actually have two presenters who were not able to come, one because she had a foot surgery and one because she's serving clients. And they're actually they did a recorded session as well. I think they are on and they'll be able to answer questions, but they recorded their presentation. So thank you to Dan and the team, and we'll get started. All right. Oh, and please, if you know how to ask questions, go ahead and put the questions in the app, and Kevin will be reviewing them and identifying what needs to be answered.
Yep, we're going to have plenty of time for questions. As David mentioned, we had LIHEAP 101 this morning. It's okay if you weren't at that. This is going on a deep dive into determining LIHEAP benefit amounts. So we'll get moving. Here's the outline of our talk. We're going to talk about why there's differences in benefit approaches, how they vary from state to state. We're going to hear from a great panel of states about their procedures for determining LIHEAP benefit amounts, the factors that they use, and the models that they deploy. We're going to look at how the same household across these different states, what their benefit amount would look like. And then we're going to hear an example from Georgia about an assessment of their benefit determination procedures and how they went about the process of implementing changes to address concerns about their procedures. And then we'll do some brief takeaways. So as I mentioned, we are focusing in for LIHEAP 102 on LIHEAP benefit approaches. And as you're going to hear shortly, there are significant differences in how states approach determining the benefit amount households receive. States use different models, they use different factors in their models, and as David mentioned, the LIHEAP statute specifically says that the highest benefits must be given to households with the greatest need and the lowest income. So we're hoping that out of this presentation, whether you work in a state office, whether you're at the local level in an agency, whether you're a stakeholder in the LIHEAP process, that just hearing examples of what different states do and why they do it and what works well and doesn't work well will be useful for you to understand your own jurisdiction. And maybe if you are looking at your state, advocating to your state, will give you just useful information to have. So there's 4 basic models for how states determine benefit amounts you're going to hear about. One is a matrix table where based on specific characteristics, a given set of characteristics provides a benefit amount. These are generally tables, and so there may be 8 different benefit amounts, there may be 20, there may be a larger number, but these are fixed numbers based on a household's characteristics. The second approach that you'll hear from Christine in Iowa is a points-based approach, where each household, based on their characteristics, is assigned a number of points, and each point has a specific dollar value. So if a household has five points, each point is worth 20, the benefit amount would be 100. The third is an equation model, where based on information and factors for a household, the benefit amount is calculated at the household level, so it can vary at a small dollar amount per household. And then finally, the fourth is a hybrid approach where you're mixing different methods, perhaps because you don't have full information for all households, so you may need to use a secondary approach if that's the case. So we're going to hear from states on each of these approaches. And we're going to start by turning to Iowa. So Christine, are you there?
Hi, yes. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as mentioned, Iowa has chosen to use the points-based approach where we assign points for different characteristics about a household. And I can't see the slide, so I'm not sure which one we're on at the moment.
Oh, hold on, Christine. Let me make sure you can see.
There we go. Good. Okay, thanks. So we use 6 main factors when determining benefit amounts, and each factor has a certain number of points assigned to it. The factors are the poverty level of the household, the main heating type, vulnerable members that are in the household, whether a household has fixed income only, the type of dwelling the household is in, and whether the household has a large savings account. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what are the steps in our process? Well, first we estimate how much funding we will be getting and the number of households that may apply for a heating benefit. We then determine a dollar value for each point. Our goal is to provide a heating benefit for each qualifying household that applies. With that in mind, we determined that each point this past year should have a $40 value. Next, we assign each household with a certain number of points based on each factor. So as an example, a household with a vulnerable member, such as someone who is disabled, would receive an extra point, so an extra $40. If a household has all 3 vulnerable population members, so that would be someone in the home that is 60 years of age or older, someone who has a disability, and a young child under the age of 6, they would receive 1 point per vulnerable member, and that would equate to an additional $120. And then finally, a benefit amount is determined based on the total points for the household. Next slide, please. There are different ways that the factors can be sourced. In Iowa, we've chosen to obtain information about the 6 different factors directly from the client application instead of an outside source. Because applicants must submit a new application each year, all we need to do is update the dollar value of a point and then update the number of points assigned to each factor as needed. So there are advantages and disadvantages to every method, including ours. So advantages to our method is that there's a set dollar value per point, so that makes it really easy to revise based on available funding. And we're able to target vulnerable populations. However, it should be noted that we don't consider the actual fuel burden or cooling burden a household is experiencing. So we aren't targeting actual energy burden, which is something we've discussed and may implement in future years. So that's it. That's Iowa's model in a nutshell. And I'll turn this over to Brian, who will tell you more about Pennsylvania's model.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in Pennsylvania, we use the equation model for our benefits. And so the factors that we use as a part of our equation are the income level, the household size, the fuel cost, and the climate region, which in Pennsylvania is just basically each county. So 67 counties, we have basically a little benefit matrix for each county when we submit our state plan each year. So what are the steps in the process for us? We assign each of these factors for the household, and then we apply a simple mathematical formula to determine the benefit amount. And we have it here. We take the income factor and we multiply that by the combined sum of the fuel cost, the family factor, the climate factor, and a base amount. And so the data sources that we use for those are all, 3 of the 4 are really straightforward, obviously. Income level, household size, and climate region. Those are all just from whatever the household reports on their application and what we verified as a part of the application process. The regional fuel costs, we determine that by partnering with the Energy Association of Pennsylvania and all of our vendors to determine what the average fuel cost is as we go into the next season. And so we program that into our formula as we start each season. So the regional fuel cost is based on the average for each specific fuel type. I should have specified that. We obviously do use different values based on whether it's fuel oil, electric, gas, coal, wood, propane. We have all of those in Pennsylvania. We have over 1,200 different vendors that provide services in Pennsylvania, and that are all participating vendors in LIHEAP. So the advantages and the disadvantages, big advantage is that it reduces the burden on the household in terms of providing documentation. They don't have to provide their bills. We can work with the utilities or the deliverable fuel vendors to verify what their account information is and that they are a customer and that sort of thing. But we don't have to verify this is their monthly bill amount. This is what they've paid. This is what they have not paid. All of that, it takes that burden off of the household, and it also simplifies the process for our caseworkers because they just, can enter the information. They don't have to worry again about, well, do I have to type in the exact, they paid $30 this month, they paid $50 in the next month, they paid $200 in the summer. None of that factors in. We just use an average fuel cost for the entire time. But there are some challenges that come along with it. This doesn't allow for us to do specific targeting of energy burden reduction, and really with the first bullet point here, households on budget billing. I mentioned it in the earlier session. We have customer assistance programs that our utilities run, and that is wholly separate from our LIHEAP program. That's required by our Public Utility Commission. And so they determine the household's eligibility, and they will, instead of charging $200 a month, they'll have a set flat fee of $25 per month or whatever the case might be. And each utility has to define that with our PUC. And so where this challenge comes in is that, we'll see people who only have a $25 a month energy bill, but we have a $300 minimum benefit for LIHEAP cash in Pennsylvania. So, $25 times 12 months is only $300 is exactly $300. So if they get, they're a low income household and qualifies for this low income program, but they get a $500 minimum $500 benefit from us, they've got now gone through the entire year without having to pay an energy bill, but they still have $200 in their account, and that can just continue to grow and grow. And so that can lead to potential problems down the road, in terms of refunds that need to come back if they move or no longer use that. So that's one of the disadvantages to it, is that we can't account for that type of budget billing as a part of our equation. And then the third challenge is that a majority of our households actually get the minimum benefit. We have, if you think in terms of a parabolic arc, it's very steep in Pennsylvania. Like, a whole lot of households get that minimum benefit, which is a high, $200 to $300, depending on what we set it at for that season. But then as they, their income goes down, it really skyrockets up to our maximum of housing. And so you'll see, when we go over a few examples a little later, that a lot of Pennsylvanias are all pretty much the same. And that's just because we have that high minimum benefit for our households. And now I will turn it over to Colorado.
Are you able to see the screen, Maria?
I am. It's still showing Iowa, though.
Okay, there you go. All right, let me try to fix that for you. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Maria with Colorado, and we use a combination approach that includes the equation model and a matrix table. We primarily use the matrix table to plug in factors when we do not have them. Next slide, please. The factors we use are the prior year's heating costs, and if we don't have it, that's when we will use an amount from the matrix table. We take into account where the household falls on the federal poverty level based on their total household income, and the main heating type comes into play when their heat is all electric. Finally, we take into account if their rent is subsidized and if they live in a shared living arrangement. Next slide, please. For Colorado's process, we start with the prior year's heating costs, and we make adjustments to the costs to calculate the final benefit. If we don't have the prior year's costs, that is when we will plug in the amount from the matrix table and begin making the same adjustments. The first adjustment is called the statewide initial adjustment, which we can update every season based on the projected funding amount and projected number of applications to ensure we have enough for those eligible for benefit. Then, if their heat is all electric, we make another adjustment to reduce it to the amount for the heat. We make another adjustment based on their total household income. Then the two final adjustments we make are for the shared household arrangement and for those whose rent is subsidized. Next slide, please. The data sources we use for our benefit calculation factors are pretty straightforward. Prior year heating costs come from the energy vendors, and all of the other factors are provided to us by the household on their application. Next slide. The prior year's heating costs provided by the energy vendors are updated every year, and the matrix table is also updated every year. The amounts used for the matrix table are calculated as the average heating costs in the prior year based on all available data for the household by dwelling type and fuel type. Next slide. The advantages of the hybrid method is that it allows for seasonal changes such as budget constraints, and it is based on the household circumstances such as income and heating usage. Another is that it ensures that the households with the highest energy burden and lowest income receive the highest benefit. It can be challenging for clients to understand how we calculate their benefit. It's also a challenge to calculate the values for the matrix table every season. And as much as we would love to calculate every household's benefit based on their specific heating costs, Some utility providers choose not to sign the vendor agreement with us. Thank you. That's from Colorado. And now on to Wisconsin.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane from Wisconsin. I think I want to sit in the back of the room. It might be warmer because that's where like everyone is right now. So in Wisconsin, we use an equation model. The enter button is not working. Okay, so what are the factors? So we also use 6 factors similarly as Iowa does, but ours are a little bit different. So we use the poverty level, which is essentially the household income and the household size. We actually have state median income as our eligibility criteria. However, we compute the FPL, so the federal poverty level as well. And then we obtain the heating and electric costs from the prior year. We also establish proxy heating costs for the fuel type and the housing type combined. So we basically create this table that a proxy, which is kind of like an average amount. If you live in a single family home with 4 rooms and you heat your home with natural gas, approximately your average heating cost would be, etc. And so all of those different variations. Another factor, of course, is the main heating fuel, which I already mentioned, housing type, which I already mentioned, and I kind of also referenced the count of rooms. So what do we do? What is our process? So we develop this average or this proxy table that I mentioned, which is heating expenditures for each type of home or dwelling, as well as what their primary heating type is. And then we obtain the prior year's heating and electric costs. So we actually have a ratepayer program in Wisconsin. So it positions us quite well to more easily obtain annual costs for heating as well as for the non-heating electric expenditures. And then we compare the prior year's expenditures to these proxy values. So everyone who applies for energy assistance, we do what we call kind of like a normalization. So if someone is a high consumer and so their annual costs are, out of the park, we normalize it. We kind of squeeze that down a little bit before we compute their final annual benefit. Or if someone is, keeping their home at a cooler temperature because they're trying to conserve energy and reduce that energy bill, we kind of bump it up a little bit to normalize it, to make it a little bit more average, and then we compute their benefit. So the final benefit is determined based on the heating costs, the household poverty level, the housing and the fuel types, which I've already mentioned. And then we also, one of the main factors, and this is similar to what Iowa mentioned, is we on the onset basically decide how much we think we're going to get for funding, because we don't really know that, right, when we start our program years. And so we project how much money that we're going to have for heating assistance benefits, and then we also project how many households that we're going to serve. And our objective is to serve everyone who comes in to apply. So just different approaches, and Dan will cover that a little bit more later to do that compare and contrast, which is quite interesting. So where do we get this information? So you can see the poverty level in the household, which is the household size and their income. That's obtained from the customers, as well as the primary heat type or fuel that heats that home, the housing type, and the count of rooms. That's all obtained from the application process. The heating and electric costs are coming from the vendors. So that's Bobby, if you were in 101, Bobby mentioned we actually have that data exchange, that web service call, where we actually obtain that information real from the vendors. And then when we develop these proxy tables, these average amounts, that table behind the scenes, that's from prior year data. So we actually look at the households that we served in the prior year. So we use that information. We also use the EIA price projections, and we also look at NOAA weather data. So, but most of it comes from the actual customer. And then, so I kind of already mentioned this, but we update that information annually. So there's a little bit of analysis that goes into place to develop those proxy tables. I would say that's probably the biggest time consumption, really, of determining what our benefits are each year. And then we also, as I mentioned earlier, we adjust those benefits based on how many households that we think we're going to serve, or we project that we want to serve, as well as how much funding that we're actually going to receive. So, what are some of the advantages or challenges that we face in Wisconsin? So, we feel pretty strongly that we are meeting our LIHEAP Assurance 5 with this matrix, with this process. We also are meeting the Wisconsin goal of our energy burden reduction. So, what our projection is and what our perspective is and our objective. And then it also provides a tiered approach for those who don't have energy costs. So I mentioned that reality check. So if someone's high consumer or lower consumer, we make an adjustment. We use that proxy table. We also do the same for customers who are maybe making a separate payment to their landlord, but they still have an energy burden, or maybe their heat's included in their rent. And we still in Wisconsin consider them in most circumstances to have an energy burden. We're not just kind of guessing or giving them all a flat amount. We're using those values from that table to compute their benefit. So we feel pretty strongly about that. Some of the challenges are because it's quite complex. It's more difficult to discern if we need to make a tweak, if we want to make a tweak, we want to adjust something. It's a little bit more challenging because of all of the variables that go into this. And then sometimes projecting the energy costs, we get it wrong. We got it wrong this year. We thought they were going to be higher, and we're not spending as much money as we had anticipated we would. The other factor that we kind of got a little wrong this year was projecting the caseload. We're about 3% down than what we projected we would serve. And so, but we continually, monitor that and make adjustments as needed. That's the Wisconsin model. Dan, I think it's to you.
Back to me. All right, you've heard of all the different ways that our states here are approaching benefit determination. Here's a nice table that kind of puts it together. So each of the states is a column. The rows are the factors that they're using to determine benefits. The yellow highlighted means that state is using that factor. So what we want to point out here is the very top, all 4 states use income and household size. That's something that's required, that's needed to be able to target benefits. All states also have to use some measure to account for energy costs. But you can see that from our examples here with Iowa, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and Wisconsin, they're using different pieces of information, either for actual energy costs or to approximate or act as a proxy for energy costs. Then some states are using other factors like, is there a vulnerable member in the household? Is there a member on a fixed income? And so there's a lot of variation here, even among these 4 states. So what we thought would be useful is to look at some comparisons across the 4 states of how the same household, same characteristics, same income, same energy expenses, what kind of benefit they would receive. So we're going to look at 3 households here. Okay, household number 1, 4-person household. They heat with natural gas. Their gas costs in the prior year were $1,300. Their annual income is $25,000. So that means their heating burden is 5%. You look across the first row in the bottom table, it shows the benefit amounts this household would receive from each of these states. And you can see it ranges from, as Brian mentioned, many households receive the minimum benefit in Pennsylvania. This household would receive $300. In Iowa, $440. In Colorado, almost a little over $900 for this household based on their approach. And we also have in this table how their heating burden is reduced. Example number 2, we're going to look at a 1-person household with an older member over age 60 with a fixed income of $15,000 a year and prior year heating costs of $500. Now, if you remember, for Iowa's points-based approach, they award points for having a vulnerable member. So here, Iowa has a high benefit of $520 for this household. Pennsylvania, $300, Colorado, a little over $200, and Wisconsin can have a range based on their hybrid approach. And then finally, a 3-person household. This household has a higher heating burden of 10%. Main heating type's electric. Also has the presence of vulnerable members in the household. Again, Iowa has a higher benefit of $560. And then the others are ranging from the 300 range for Pennsylvania and Colorado, and Wisconsin from about the $200 to $400 range. One tool that you can use to understand how well your benefit determination approaches are meeting the statutory rules of targeting assistance to the households with the greatest need is from the performance measures that states have to submit each year as part of their LIHEAP federal reporting. There's two indexes that get calculated from that performance measures report. One is the benefit targeting index. That's looking at how well higher benefit amounts are being targeted to households that have higher energy burdens. The second is called the burden reduction targeting index. That's looking at if higher burden households are having their energy burden reduced by a similar or greater amount than the average across all assisted households. So you can see their scores for both index in this bar chart. The left is the benefit targeting. They're all above 100, which means that the highest burden households are receiving higher benefit amounts. But there's more variability with the burden reduction targeting index. Colorado was a little under 100 this year, but all the other states are above 100 in this example. So if you're not familiar, look for the performance measures results on the performance management website. All right, we're going to go on to hear an example from Cynthia in Georgia. What was that?
You should see if there are any questions. Do you have questions for? I think we
okay. Pause. Okay.
Yes, we have some questions. This one, Jay kind of already answered, but just make sure that to add or anyone else. Do you ever find the deliverable fuel costs are different than what was expected prior to the heating season?
Yes, but I think we find the same thing with natural gas and electric costs. So it's kind of tough, I think, to project a year in advance. And so those are variables, but that's where our crisis program comes in.
Do any of the companies distributing LIHEAP work with other state income-based programs to automatically provide LIHEAP? And if not, why not?
The answer is yeah. If there's a state program that complements LIHEAP and provides bill payment assistance for low-income households, many of them work together with the LIHEAP program in providing the assistance.
I also wanted to add that the presenters and GoTo can also chime in if they want to. Someone asked, I would love to hear any thoughts about whether one method makes it easier to predict or minimize fluctuations year over year to reduce the possibility of running out of funding.
We heard from Jane about some of the challenges with that. I think that's kind of a universal challenge with not exactly knowing how much funding you're going to get, not knowing how many people are going to apply. Brian, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, what we have found in Pennsylvania is that our equation model tends to work fairly accurately in terms of for projections and in terms of we think if we set it at these levels, this is how much we will spend throughout the year. Where we sometimes see factors catching us by surprise or with prices. That's a lot harder for us to project. Is what our final price numbers are going to look like. And again, because that fluctuates from month to month based on fuel costs and what's going on right there. Whereas our cash matrix, like I said, with our equation model, we program in what we are estimating the fuel costs to be for the entire year, and so that doesn't change even if the fuel costs do go up or down very easily.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, as Dan said, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but if we knew what our funding was earlier in the year, which has happened, we will sometimes make an adjustment earlier on in the year, and we do what's called a supplemental benefit. So we'll kind of recompute our benefit formula, and then go back and pay everyone from a certain point of time with that new formula. So we'll kind of pay the difference, and then everyone moving forward will be adjusted accordingly with that new formula. When that happens later on in the program year, so like this year, our funding was quite late, right, everyone? And so when the funding came so much later, it makes that decision much more challenging. And so we chose to not do a supplemental benefit this year. We process someone's eligibility and their benefits maybe in October, November, and then come May, you're going to go back and it's like, okay, so it's a lot of legwork to say, is that household still in that same situation? Are they still alive? So it makes things a little bit more challenging and more administrative burdensome. So we chose to actually do some more crisis initiatives.
Maybe one more?
We have two more.
Two more?
For Pennsylvania, how many vendors do you work with and how many participate? Please explain how you collect all that data.
Very, very lot of work. No, we have, as I said, we have over 1,200 participating vendors in Pennsylvania. It used to actually be over 1,400, but a lot of those that have since gone on are small mom and pop deliverable fuel, companies that were selling wood or whatever and got retired or got bought out. So yes, like I said, we have over 1,200 that are participating in the LIHEAP program, and we keep a spreadsheet. That is what my staff report, and bless them, they are not here. But like I said, we reach out to all of our utility vendors and we gather what is their estimated average cost. How much is a quart of wood going to be? How much will it be per gallon of fuel do they anticipate charging? And we collect that and we store it all in a spreadsheet. We just go in every year, starting over the summer while we're doing all our state plan work, and reach out and do those emails back and forth so we can get those data, and we just update our spreadsheet, type it in, and send it over to our IT people, and they get it incorporated into our system and update the equation.
And the last question we have is, what tips do you have to maximize assistance for customers?
That's a loaded question.
My thought that comes to mind is, I think it's maybe a little bit less about the benefit formula. I mean, you need to make it meaningful, so your benefit needs to be made meaningful for someone to go through the process. I think it's more about outreach and making yourself available and making the application process kind of like the 101, and making that application process as seamless as you can and less burdensome for the customer, for sure, but also the local agencies.
So the person who asked that question for 101, I think this is their question. So what is the problem with giving everyone the same benefit?
That would not be in accordance with the statute, which says that you have to vary benefits based on their greatest energy need. And so households that have higher energy burdens, lower incomes, higher energy costs, have to be given the highest levels of assistance. So that's a statutory thing that HHS looks at when they come to visit, when they come to monitor. And it's important because households have varying needs, and the benefit amount, to equitably serve households, you want the benefit amount to reflect that.
That's what those targeting indexes were.
Right.
Maybe a way to also answer that is, I'll just pick on Brian because he's my buddy. So fuel costs tend to be more expensive, right, than natural gas costs. So Brian and I are still living, or we have the same income level. We're different households. We have the same income level. We live in the same type of home, but he heats his home with fuel oil, and I heat my home with natural gas. And if we both got $300 as our benefit, that's a bummer for Brian. So that, I think, maybe tells the same story, but I think that's probably the why behind, right, that assurance.
Now, no approach is perfect, but you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know how our approach is doing? How do I know what kinds of changes to make or to advocate for? So we're going to hear an example from Cynthia in Georgia about a process they recently went through to change their benefit determination approach.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to talk about how in Georgia, we recently made some changes to our benefit determination procedures. In Georgia, we use a benefit matrix to assign each household a benefit amount. While some states may have very large matrix tables, our matrix in Georgia was pretty straightforward. Households were all assigned to one of two income levels based on their household size and annual income amount. Income level 1 was the lower income category that provided the highest benefit amount. And income level 2 was the higher income category with the lower LIHEAP benefit amount. Importantly, if a household had an elderly member, they were automatically assigned the higher benefit amount regardless of their income. The matrix we used was easy to understand and remained unchanged for years. Next slide. But there were issues identified with our matrix and how benefits were assigned to households. We realized that our approach was not effectively targeting benefits as intended. The two issues that brought this to our attention were first, an HHS review that found our matrix was not meeting the requirements of LIHEAP Section 95, which says
Cut out a little bit, Cynthia.
amount should be furnished to households with the lowest income and highest.
Hey, Cynthia.
So we had two issues. First was the HHS review, and the second was our performance measures data showed the highest burden households were actually receiving lower than average LIHEAP benefit amounts instead of higher than average benefit amounts. That told us our approach was not working and we needed to make some changes. Next slide. The first change we made was to revise our income categories. With the analysis of our household data report, it showed that almost 95% of households we assisted were falling into the lower income level in our matrix and getting the higher.
So as Cynthia said, what they looked at was they realized that the vast majority of their households fell into one of their two income categories that they used for their benefit determination procedures. So 95% of the households fell into one income category and were receiving that benefit amount. So for their 2024 matrix, they updated their two income categories to change the limits so that more households would be more evenly distributed among those two categories. So that change should reduce most households from receiving the same maximum, all receiving the same benefit amount. Change number two was that Cynthia and the folks in Georgia removed the vulnerable benefit category. So the way their procedures worked was if a household had a member aged 60 years or older, they were automatically receiving the highest benefit amount, regardless of their income or energy cost. Based on the historical data for their state, that was over half of their assisted households had an elderly aged member over age 60. So for their 2024 matrix to address this issue, they removed that benefit category, but they continue to prioritize elderly households through their outreach approaches to make sure that they receive assistance. And then the last change was, you remember that Cynthia reported a finding that that their matrix did not include a factor to account for energy need or fuel type. So to address that, they updated the 2024 matrix to adjust benefit amounts based on main heating fuel type, which was also the example Jane shared. So they did this using the performance measures data, where they looked at the energy cost differences for households by main heating type. Based on the differential between each main heating type, they make a simple adjustment to the benefit amount based on the average differences for each fuel type. Cynthia, are you there?
I am.
All right, you want to do this last slide and talk about your interaction with your stakeholders?
Will do. Okay, thank you. Changing something as important as how benefits are assigned need to be made thoughtfully and with input from our stakeholders.
All right, Cynthia, I'm going to step in again.
Sorry.
So in Georgia, when they made this change, they didn't just make the change one day and it came into effect the next day, but they engaged their network about potential changes. went through the challenges and the concerns, and continue to meet with their network regularly to see how the changes that they've made are actually playing out on the ground and what kind of tweaks or adjustments may be needed in the future. All right, so we're going to just do some takeaways and then we'll turn back for more questions. So hopefully, as you've seen today, there's lots of varying approaches in how states assign benefits and determine benefits per household. You've seen the different models that our example states are using, and you've heard from them on the strengths of their models and the weaknesses and trade-offs that are involved with their approaches. Some require annual updates that are extensive, some may require less extensive updates. It's really important that with your benefit determination procedures that you are making sure that they are in accordance with the LIHEAP statutory goals and also reflect your own state's program goals and priorities. At a minimum, every state needs to account for income and household size, otherwise known as poverty level, and some measure of energy costs. If you're thinking about your own state's approaches and whether you want to make some changes or look into changes, there's a few good questions you can ask yourself. First, about the model you're using. How easy or how challenging is it to update your model, to deploy your model, and to determine benefits? An important analysis to do is look at the distribution of benefits to see for your LIHEAP recipient population, what is the distribution of benefits across the population? How many are receiving the very minimum benefit? How many are receiving the maximum benefit? It's also important to look at the different factors you're using in your model. Factors get different weights, and so some factors are more important than other factors depending on the approach you're looking at. So before you make a change to a factor, you want to do the analysis to see how much does this factor actually impact the benefit amount a household is receiving. Will a small change result in large benefit changes? Will a large change have little impact because that factor doesn't have a lot of weight in the determination procedures? Is the factor reliable, or is there better data that may be available that can more accurately reflect the need of a household? And are there any factors that are really already represented in our benefit determination procedures by another factor, and we're really accounting for the same thing multiple times? So we encourage you to look at these. There's resources on the LIHEAP Clearinghouse that go into, you can see different states' benefit matrices and access them, so we encourage you to do that. All right, so now we'll turn to question and answer for the last few minutes and have our panel members take your questions.
How do you account for highly contested rate cases? For example, in Wisconsin, the rate case decisions often come in late December for rates that go into effect January 1st. So do you assume that what the IOU has requested is what the IOU will get, or do you make some different estimate?
Wow, that's a tough one. Let me just answer it this way. The division in our department does not get involved in rate cases. And our analysis is based on, as I mentioned, 3 factors. One, prior year's information by customers provided when they apply for energy assistance, as well as EIA and NOAA information. And then I guess, it's hard for what's being reported when the customer applies. It's based on the rate that's being charged to them. I don't know if I really answered that question, but
I'm not the one who asked.
Yeah, so I don't. Maybe find me at the end if you want to talk a little bit more about that. But I can just tell you that we do not get involved in rate cases. And you were informed, and we're kept informed, but you're not involved.
Well, but you do modify. If suddenly there's a much higher rate, you modify.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what David was saying, I don't know if everyone can hear, but we will adjust accordingly if there is a significant increase or if there's an increase because of the rates.
Do any of these states offer emergency reconnection assistance? And if so, how much? What is the limit?
That would be, sometimes with your energy assistance benefit, you can prevent or reconnect someone who's already been disconnected. But we also have emergency if the energy assistance benefit didn't trigger that reconnection, or this time of the year, which is very prevalent in Wisconsin because our winter moratorium is in place and April 15th. So it would be really heavy right now, and that there is an emergency component of our crisis program.
What's the next?
It depends. It's really what our policy is a little bit more complex, but our policy basically allows the agencies the flexibility to go up to $800, and if they need to exceed that, they contact our help desk, and then our team makes a discretionary decision based on the information provided that's going on in the household.
Yeah, I mean, we refer to our programs as cash and crisis in Pennsylvania. I know that other states refer to them. I was talking to District of Columbia earlier today, and they refer to it as standard and emergency. So it's all slightly different terminology. So, like I said, we do offer our crisis program, and we do up to $1,000 maximum for our crisis benefit, and we do allow them to get multiple benefits up until they hit that $1,000 max. And that we adjust that each year based on what we anticipate funding.
Yeah, Christine, would you like to comment on that?
Sorry about that. Yes, we, just as the others mentioned, so oftentimes the actual heating benefit will take care of a crisis. But if it doesn't, then we do have crisis funds available to help restore connection, avert a disconnection, whatever the case may be.
Maria or Cynthia?
This is Maria. We don't have a separate crisis benefit. We just let the vendors know that they've been approved and to reconnect them.
Does anyone in this session have different procedures that recommend?
Yeah, I think that's an audience question.
Yeah, I think so.
Anybody else have any benefit determination things or factors that you think would be good to share with the audience? That's
No one likes their benefit.
okay. Any others?
I have a question. So you have the benefit targeting index and you have the burden reduction index. Is there a place that you can go to see other states' scores on those?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, so that, yes. If you go, so that actually the easiest tool to use to look at your targeting where you are is a tool called the Executive Summary that was designed a number of years ago by the LIHEAP Performance Management Implementation Working Group. And this is like a one-page summary that answers the question of how well you're targeting, and also kind of summarizes everything in a graphic form. So we're going to shut all this stuff off. They're on the LIHEAP Performance Management website. There's a page called Performance Measures right here where it says Snapshots Executive Summaries. Let's pull up, maybe we'll pull up Brian's from Pennsylvania. Let's see. And so this gives a nice one-page snapshot. And you can see on the left-hand side in the gray box are the two questions related to the indexes. Are you giving higher benefits to higher burden households? Is LIHEAP paying a larger share of the energy bill for high burden households? So it provides the answer, and it gives you the breakdown, and it also gives you items related to the other question about reconnections, preventing disconnections, and other information. So you can go and look at this for any any state, you can find it going back several years. So we encourage people to go look at that.
And perhaps is there some kind of warehouse that has all of these data?
Yes, it's all in the LIHEAP data warehouse.
Dana, can
Any?
I just add something?
Yeah.
That it was important to me, and so it might be important to a few others, is to know that the energy burden reduction has a crisis component to it. So the math, when you're looking at that burden reduction, it includes crisis assistance. So it's not just the benefit matrix that we've been talking about, which is heating assistance focused. It includes crisis benefits that have been issued to those households as well, because that's considered, reducing people's burden.
Yep.
So one of the things that we found that I don't know that it's highlighted front is that there's a real hesitance for people to give significantly higher benefits to people who have significantly more burden, even though it makes sense, right? People are afraid to give a $200 benefit to one person and $1,000 to another because it looks like you're giving so much more money and it's not equal. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, and I know it's political, but if you're looking straight at how do we compare the statute before it's being the benefit, it may mean needing to move 10 with that equity. Is that the right word? No, equality, right? I was doing that. Right, thanks, Brian. Dealing with that issue. Do you want to add to that? Okay.
There's one other thing that I want to mention, which is, we hear from lots of states, lots of local agencies, tribes, and there's kind of the feeling that your procedures are set in stone. This is the way they are. This is the way they've always been. We don't know why it's that way, but hopefully you've seen nothing set in stone, and changes can be made or looked at. And one thing that several states have done is they haven't just gone and completely redone everything all at once, but they'll look ahead and see where they want to be, and they can make a plan to kind of incrementally make improvements and see how things are working. So that's something that can be done. It doesn't have to be large wholesale changes. You heard Cynthia talk about some changes she made. She's working with her network to see how they're doing. And Teresa in Colorado had a similar process a few years ago with their income categories. So we encourage you to talk to other people who've made those kinds of changes.
Thank you for coming to the session. Let's thank our presenters.